The Centre for Recent Drawing, also known as C4RD, is a member of the Museum Association of the UK and a UK charity. Positioning itself as a museum space for drawing in London, C4RD was founded as an artist project in 2004 to encourage independent and non-commercial production by providing space for a broad variety of drawing practices in public exhibitions, residencies, both in-house and online, and talks and publications. Studio International has come to C4RD in North London to speak to the director and artist Andrew Hewish and to meet two artists, Gordon Shrigley and Will Peck, currently undertaking a Centre for Recent Drawing in-house collaborative residency. Andrew, can you tell us how the Centre for Recent Drawing came about and how it has developed over the past 10 years?
In 2004, I was in a studio group in Bethnal Green, and there was a space there. There was a space that couldn't be used for a studio, but it was a great space. And you had to, because you had to enter through the to get to the other studios, you had to enter through this space. London is an expensive city, it remains an expensive city. It's difficult to see drawing. I had a particular love of drawing. I've trained quite a bit in drawing, and I was very interested in the drawing histories in Britain. But I felt that there was a lot in that story that was not being represented, and so it seemed to be necessary to find an economy of showing drawings that was an alternative to that which the commercial galleries could provide. But again, and to focus on drawing is not just to focus on contemporary art, and so whilst there is some interesting contemporary art drawing, or drawing within the contemporary art context, that didn't also seem to be enough to supply the full context of what drawing can be. So I thought, here's a space, it's an opportunity for drawing to be shown. And so on the back of that, I simply started a program whereby we could find people who were working specifically in drawing, and to show them to show the work that represented the breadth of drawing activity in London and around the world, if possible. So it was very much established on the smell of an oil rag, and from that, I found that it was a nice place to be, in all senses of the word, because drawing is an activity that doesn't have the same visibility as other creative forms, but there seem to be very particular sorts of people who are interested in it that I found interesting, and to introduce drawing as a category, as a classification in itself, automatically produces some interesting ways of thinking and particular kinds of work that might not have, be visible. Early on, Gordon Shrigley was someone who arrived and said, "Well, this is a subject close to my heart, and I have some drawings." And of course, he's the author of How Drawing Saved the World. It's a collection of not only his own writings as an artist and architect, but also those of very, very interesting other theorists, some of whom are physicists, etc. But and I would say Gordon is part of thinking broadly about what drawing can be. And so, for instance, we showed his work, for instance. We showed early on Pip Seymour, who was a materials expert and could take that tacit knowledge of materials into the drawing context and therefore produce, again, something new and interesting as a dialogue. Early on, we were joined by Daphne Astor Warburg, who walked in one day and said, "This is really interesting what you're doing. I want to be a part of this," and helped me establish the UK charity that C4RD is. And she also had quite amazing histories in herself in terms of of drawing. Her father was one of the people who helped set up MoMA in New York, and her cousin Win Kremarski was one of the principals in setting up the Drawing Centre in New York. And so she was key in terms of being able to broaden the scope of C4RD's activities and reach in those terms. And we shipped over an exhibition of John Walker's work, who, whilst he's British, has spent a lot of time in the US, so it was great to get that early work of his from the 70s. Dabu Dadu, who it was conceived by Kirsten Hectorman and Daphne Warburg-Astor. And actually, she sold some of the work as a result of the exhibition. We don't sell work, but if people wanted to buy them, we just got her to contact her directly. And she managed to pay for a whole sort of paddock for her farm in Africa. So these she hasn't grown up with television. She hasn't grown up with many books. And this is a way of thinking through stitch pictorially about its possibilities. Obviously, there's inspiration from nature in them, but for us, it was more about sort of traveling with the line, as you can see she does, around the page, or in this case, the swatch. So there's this level of invention that doesn't rely on a pictorial history. So this is an interesting example, I think, of drawing and invention that happens in this. Obviously, she's quite a good colorist as well. But stitch as drawing, in the context of being a stitch maker. Rather than, her work is sold for all sorts of contexts. It's not, particularly that, I am an artist, I'm doing this as an artist. This is I am an inventive, creative person, and there's lots within drawing that this amplifies and articulates, which I think is interesting for us to do. So another exhibition we did was Bob and Roberta Smith. He's very much a political artist, and people could come in and rearrange as they would like. And so there was this interesting play between the authorial voice of the artist and the capacity of the drawing to be reworked, for all these objects to be repositioned as gestures within the drawing context across space rather than across a two-dimensional page. Another one worth mentioning is Morgan O'Hara, who's very well known internationally, based largely in the United States. It was in conjunction with a placement we did for her with the English National Ballet. And so she would track their movements with the pencil, using various pencils across two hands. There would be this interesting and uncertain relationship between tracking the movements and the action of her hand. We have a regular collaboration in the main space during August, which usually attracts an international artist. We've had work from the comics context, which was devised by John Mears and curated with the Comica Festival, and produced some quite obscure and esoteric comics, but then nonetheless embedded in the comics context. And so you have this interrelationship between what happens in the comics context when transferred to, I guess, the museum or gallery situation that we have here. We also have zine that we've published here. Paul Kindersley, who is an artist, curated the zine, which was called Box of Desires, where a considerable number of artists, about 30 artists, contributed. And so someone could sift through this box and see quite a huge range of drawings in this box. And these boxes were collected by the Victoria and Albert Museum and by MoMA in New York. So there's an interesting relationship between the sort of thinking that goes on here and the way that people might collide with it, and then the distribution of that can end up, quite far afield. And so the archive itself can physically sit in other museums, as well as in our own exhibition archive.